All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, welcome to what is the first in a series of free webinars that we're going to be producing. My name is Roger Smith. I am the general manager of TreeSource Citrus Nursery in California. The nursery is located in the beautiful foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains in Wood Lake, California. We're surrounded by orange groves, and it's a beautiful place to work. Very modern facility. We have autonomous robots and a lot of automation. And we're a small plant supplier to the United States and foreign countries of citrus trees, as well as to the agricultural community, which we are in the heart of the California citrus growing region. So what we are doing, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary, and so we're starting a series of webinars of information that we've learned over the years as we've grown this facility from this small, humble beginnings to what this is today. And a couple of the other seminars or webinars that we'll be doing is keys to automating tree production in a greenhouse facility, how to make barcodes work in a commercial facility, which isn't always something that's simple to do, and there's a lot of technological things you got to do to make them work. And another one that we're planning is wins and losses of biocontrol in a commercial nursery. So we've learned a lot of lessons on some of those topics, and also if there are topics that you would like to share or would like us to talk about, feel free to put those in the comments. Also, you'll also be able to note that there's a Q&A tab on this webinar, and so if you've got any questions, just go ahead and type those in there. I will look at the questions at the end of the webinar and be able to answer those questions. In addition, this webinar is being recorded, so if you like what you hear and feel like you want to share it with someone, please feel free to do so once that comes out for you to do. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the topic that we have today, which was up earlier, which is how to create high margin sales in a wholesale greenhouse. So what you'll learn today is what is high margin sales, how at least how I'm defining it. You're going to learn researching methods to figure out how to do pricing and proper markups. You're going to learn about buying right, making sure you make good choices of a small plant supplier that will help you be successful. And most importantly, how to do the math to achieve the high margin results. Not very complicated math, but math is part of what we're going to do today. We'll show some examples about how to do that. So what do we mean by high margin? Let's just jump in. This is just my definition based upon many 35 years of experience working in the nursery industry. It's really just math. It's whatever you're selling as a wholesale outlet, whatever price you're selling it to, minus your cost of production, everything that goes into that, as well as delivery costs. And then when everything's said and done, you still have more than $3 per unit in your pocket. And some may say that that's not high enough, but some may say that's really high. But this is a good example of this is a good target to have, because if you're making $3 a unit on product, that's pretty good. And we're going to talk about different kinds of products that you potentially can find to do that. And how to do that is that you need to have, in order to get a higher wholesale margin, shooting for that $3, it really depends on choosing the products that have higher prices at retail. Something that sells for $8.99 is going to be really difficult to have much of a margin on. So here is an example. We'll be using citrus as examples because we are a citrus nursery, so that's what we have the most content on. But this was taken locally here in California. A 5-gallon citrus tree price is right at $50. And so that's a good example of something that has a high price at retail And this tree, very same tree in Ohio or in other parts of the country, could go for closer to $100. It just depends on the availability of products. So you're looking for products, and a lot of times those products are trees or larger plants that are going to have this high price point in order to try to achieve the result of getting this high margin that we're after. So how do you find the high margin? Well, the first thing is to identify the product at retail, and just like I just mentioned. And so how do you do that? Well, you shouldn't be looking for a product to try to find a high price on the internet. Internet prices are very different than they are in garden centers. And even though internet sales customers are really good customers to have, it's just not a good place to do research, because the garden centers, are still moving the bulk of the products, and oftentimes the internet sellers don't even have pictures of the product that they're selling. They have what the product would look like in somebody's garden, and so they're not a really good place to do research. Certainly a good place to do sales, but not a good place to do research. So go and visit a big box retailer or their competitors in your area. It's worth the time investment. Note how the products are displayed and marketed in those garden centers. How many are there? What kind of pot are they in? Where are they in the garden center? What kind of tagging do they have? Things like that. Photograph or video what you see, especially the prices, because that's going to be a key part of your research is trying to be able to establish what that retail price point is. And it's important also to visit multiple places, because you can go into a Home Depot and a Lowe's and you'll find out the prices are identical. And then you go to a local popular garden center that is maybe more of a locally run chain, and the prices could be completely different. So it's important to spend some time doing that, and also visit more than once. Go at a certain time of year and then go to a second time of year. Try to note seasonality and supply. If you're starting to think about your first trip, you're starting to think about what you could sell. Like, let's assume you're thinking about citrus, and you go to these garden centers and nobody has any of them. That's interesting. And then you come back a month later or 2 months later and the stores are full of them, then you're starting to see the seasonality of it, and you don't want to make an assumption that they don't stock a certain product because you only visited once. So this research part of it is key to coming to the decision of what you're going to do and to be able to chase this high margin opportunity. So the other thing that's important is try to discover the normal markup that the retailer uses from the wholesale price. If you're already selling to these types of outlets, you may already know what their markup is. If you can't figure it out, and they're not always necessarily that obvious to be able to find out what that markup is, just assume 100%. In many cases, they may even do higher than 100%. But the 100% is a good place to start for calculating and trying to figure out what your price needs to be able to match whatever's at the garden center or undercut what's at the garden center. Some discount retailers may use a smaller markup or do the falling price approach, which is common like at Walmart and Costco, where they'll bring things in at a certain price, and as they sell, they want to try to move the product out of the stores, they'll start falling the price until all the units are gone. So just pay attention to that. And if you're there and there's very limited supply of something you're looking at, the price there may actually be the discounted price. So pay attention to that as you're doing your research. So the other thing, many of these products that have high margin are typically products that a wholesale nursery or greenhouse operation would buy product from a small plant supplier. So you want to find a small plant supplier that can deliver that plant that can turn in less than 6 months. Some would even say less than 3 months. But if you're looking for high margin products, they're typically high margin because they're in the nursery longer. So less than 6 months is probably a better plan. You want to learn the delivered price and the quantity discounts from the small plant supplier. And the longer turns can work as small plants are cheaper, but the turn is longer. So for example, using 2 of our small plant products, TreeSource is an example. This is the SP tree, which stands for small pot, which is a faster turn product that could actually do it probably even faster than the 6-month turn, but it's more expensive. It takes more freight to get it there. And so you have different costs that are going to be associated with this, as opposed to a citrus liner, which is a much smaller product, but you're going to add another 6 or 8 months of production cost into this. So you'll have to weigh what the best way to do it is. If you're in a hurry, you can do it with a small, you can get bigger product. One of the things that you have to remember is that the high margin items are often difficult to grow. And so having a good quality start plant from a small plant supplier is really important. Variability can often be a problem with some of these types of varieties. And so you have to actually probably bring in extra to make sure that you're going to have uniformity. The uniformity is a challenge for some of these high margin types of crops. And that's why buying the right small plant is important. And remember, the better the small plant, the faster the turn is going to be. So, if you researching the right supplier to do the job is going to be really important as you're considering what you're going to do. So then obviously you need to work out the production costs. So anybody who's raising product has done this before, so they know that there's a container and there's going to be substrate or soil mix that costs, and fertilizer costs and labor costs and energy costs and packaging costs are all going to be part of the formula to be able to achieve an answer of what your production costs are going to be. And so you need to be careful to make sure that you're thinking about, if you're going to be buying something like in this previous slide, which is a small plant product, then you'll be able to have to add the costs of the different production items to that. In addition to that, you need to also remember that you're going to develop the cost of delivery. And it typically can't be perfect because you're guessing at different things, but you're going to have to say, okay, what's it going to cost to get it there? So you have to answer some questions. When you're in your research stage at the garden centers, are they receiving a lot of product on pallet racks or carts or just straight pallets? And see, the bigger the plant, the more you have to think about how you're going to palletize, and these items all have costs that you got to account for that. What are the store's receiving hours? You say, well, what does that got to do with anything? Well, if you're going to be delivering to your region and you're going to be delivering to multiple stores, and the store's receiving hours are very narrow, like early in the morning for just 2 or 3 hours, you'll find yourself having the delivery driver on the road for multiple days just to empty a truck of the size like I'm showing in this example. So knowing the store's receiving hours and some of the receiving policies is really important, and every store is going to have different plans. I remember one time we sold to Costco, and Costco had, not every store was the same. And they had will call green goods receiving hours that were very specific, and it was very difficult to deliver to them because they're bringing in a lot of product, and every store has their idea about how to do it. So it's important to pay attention to that, because if you got a driver spend the night and run the credit card on meals, it's going to be adding to the cost, not beyond the fuel and the truck itself. One of the ways to avoid some of that is to have stores that work through distribution centers. That's kind of a dream. You just deliver everything to the distribution center, and the distribution center gets it to the individual stores. So that certainly would be a positive if you could find stores that do that. And there are distribution centers that are independent of different kinds of stores that specialize in doing distribution. Oftentimes, supermarkets, for example, will have a commercial company that is distributing their green goods to the stores, because it is a sideline for a grocery store. So you can find, as you do your research, learning these sorts of things will help you figure out ways to save cost. And then, of course, how many stores can a driver deliver in a day has a lot to do with what the store's receiving hours are. Of course, in a distribution center, it doesn't matter because he's just delivering to one thing. And then of course, any business that's pre-existing, you're going to have the ability to combine this new product that you're developing with other SKUs that you're already doing. And so, having a high margin crop that can be joined in with stuff that might have lower margins will be a very good mix for companies. And that's a common thing that we see with some of our customers, is that they were already going to the Home Depots, but their margins were narrow, and so they decided to add citrus to their product line to be able to do that. And we've seen that happen a lot in the 25 years we've been doing this. All right, so now you need to establish a wholesale price. You've done all the research, you've kind of gone through the details of costing, and so you want this wholesale price that you're going to be charging the retailer to be as high as possible. But you got to be aware of the normal markup at retail, because if your price is too high, then they're just going to go to somebody else for the same product if they can find that something. So you don't want to price yourself out of the market. But on the flip side of that, you don't want to be afraid of substantial margins if the market can bear it. If, for example, and I'm going to use citrus as an example, if a 5-gallon citrus tree in Ohio is selling for $80, and you can make that product with so cheap that you're having a $20 margin, don't be afraid of that, because that's good. Because what if there becomes competition in the marketplace, and you get in a price war with a competitor? You want plenty of wiggle room. They may not be as efficient as you, and so you'll be able to undercut their price and hang on to the customer. So let's do the math. So going back to my original example, so we're going to take your price per unit, and we're going to subtract it from the small plant cost, assuming that you're having a small plant supplier, the production costs, and the delivery costs. And so to do that, we're going to do an example. So let's assume the tree that I showed earlier that we took at Home Depot here in California that was about $50 retail. Assume that tree a good simple price of $58.80 retail for a 3-gallon squat pot citrus. And prices vary. Citrus trees are obviously cheaper in California because a lot of them are produced here. But again, like I said, you go across the country, you can get the same product for much higher than that. So we're going to assume in this example that the box store markup is 100%. So the delivered wholesale price would be this retail price divided by 2, which is $29.40. So that would, and you start there, and the whole exercise here is, are we going to have a high margin product with this example? So using TreeSource as an example, on our small pot citrus tree, which is a great shifting stock into a 5 or 3 or even a 2, it's $13 in California. And so in addition to that, there's going to be freight from the small plant supplier. So the placeholder for freight here from the small plant supplier would be about $3 a unit. So you're going to be starting out with an $18 cost before you put any of your own costs into them. We're assuming a 3-gallon squat pot, $1.15 per pot is just if you're buying them in high volume, you're going to get them a lot cheaper than that. If you're buying in low volume, it may be closer to this. So it just it's a good placeholder to say the pot's going to cost something. Your substrate's going to be a cost as well. We're using a price that we pay for a high quality substrate of coconut fiber and peat moss and perlite. So that's an expensive soil mix. We're using a 3-gallon squat pot. So, about 67 of those can be done in a cubic yard. And so, which works out to be about 64 cents a pot for substrate. Labor and miscellaneous, there's not a ton of labor in this particular product. And the miscellaneous is just the things that we don't think of that could give us cost depending on where you are in the country and what your cost would be. So $2 per unit there. The delivery cost, a $2 placeholder there. And then so how does the math work out? So we're starting again with that $29.40, which is the retail price divided by 2. And then we subtract that from the $13 for the tree, $3 to get the tree to you. And this is kind of based on Nebraska from California. So it gives you an idea that, you know, it could be a little bit more, it could be less, depending on where your supplier is. The price of the pot, the price of the soil, price of the labor and care, bug control and everything, and the price of the delivery cost. So in this particular example, with this starting point of $29.40, you have a profit margin of $7.61, which is substantially higher than the $3 target that we were talking about in the beginning. So the value of this exercise is that if any of the numbers here are wrong, like let's say the delivery cost is going to be double that, well, this margin can take that. You know, so if you're doing your initial calculations and your assumptions, and you come in with a nice margin like this, if something happens in the process that you didn't calculate it right, then you have some wiggle room in there. And there's lots of things that go wrong in all of this. That's the game we play, is that we're trying to do our best to predict the market. But one of the things that is often the case is that we're doing very high volumes of things at very low margins, and maybe even break even sometimes because of the shrinkage that may occur. And so pursuing something for the high margin is maybe more of a sure thing than always dedicating all of your greenhouse space to something that has narrower margins. So final tips and takeaways here. Do your research to identify high margin opportunities. Look for those types of plants that have a high retail price point, which allows you to have a higher wholesale price point and gives you a chance to have a higher margin return. Use a quality small plant supplier to turn them quickly. So it's important that the disease-free and people that are able to answer questions and provide you the tools necessary to be able to do the product is really important, especially if you're taking on something that's a little challenging, like citrus or other crops that have high retail price points. Be diligent with the details. Don't gloss over them. That's why this kind of a webinar is helpful, because some of the details may be obvious, but some of the others may not be so obvious. And so if you want to be diligent in that and make sure that you do the math correctly and you don't miss any of the points that are important. And then go out and win. That's what it's all about. It's about making money and being successful and serving customers and making consumers happy and all that. So if you do all these things with this process, you will be successful in finding a high margin product that could really help your business move down the road. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to drop over to the Q&A section to see if anybody's got any questions or left any questions. Don't see any questions, so if there are any questions, go ahead and type them in, and we'll take a moment to answer them. All right, well, with that, I don't see any questions coming in. So I'd just like to remind you to feel free to share this webinar with anyone that you may know that might be interested in this information. Keep your eyes open for future presentations that we will be doing. And we appreciate you taking the time to spend a little time with us. And hopefully this has been a useful presentation that will help you find high margin sales in the future. Thanks a lot.